Black girl cries and begs, "Please don't hurt us." Then her billionaire adoptive father bursts in. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. The room was dark, only faint light streaming through the crack of a closed curtain. A cold wind from the storm outside rattled the window. Inside, a small figure stood trembling in the middle of the room. She was no older than 8, her small hands tightly clutching the sleeves of a worn-out sweater. Her eyes, wide with fear, stared at the man who stood towering over her. He had the look of someone accustomed to power, sharp, polished, with an air of cold detachment. "Please, don't hurt us," the little girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I didn't mean any harm, I promise. Please don't." She was cut off as a sharp laugh echoed from the man. His eyes scanned her, disdainful. "You really think you can escape this? That somehow, you can get away with this little stunt?" He stepped forward, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. But just as the tension reached its breaking point, the door slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot, sharp and unexpected. And then, he appeared, tall, confident, and unmistakably powerful. The billionaire. The man who had everything. And yet, the way he looked at the girl was different. It was a look of recognition. A look that said, this child is mine." The room froze, time hanging in the balance. The man who had just been a threat now stood still, his gaze shifting from the little girl to the man who had walked in. The billionaire's eyes softened. He moved forward, his voice low but steady. "Get away from her." The man hesitated, not understanding, but the billionaire didn't wait. With a single, authoritative gesture, the man was forced back. The little girl flinched, but then she heard the voice that would change everything. "You're safe now," the billionaire said, kneeling beside her. His hand was warm, a stark contrast to the cold storm outside. "I'm here." The billionaire's hand hovered over the little girl's trembling shoulder as he knelt beside her, his breath slow and deliberate. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a beast trying to break through the walls, but inside the room, an eerie silence settled. The man who had been a threat, the one who had towered over her moments ago, now stood frozen in place. The billionaire's presence was undeniable. His gaze, sharp and authoritative, shifted from the man to the girl. There was no doubt, no hesitation in his eyes. "Get away from her," the billionaire commanded again, his voice steady but tinged with something darker, something protective. Without a word, the man took a step back, his eyes darting between the two of them. He seemed to understand that this was no ordinary encounter. The billionaire's reputation preceded him, but there was something deeper, something more personal in his actions now. The little girl, still wide-eyed and trembling, slowly looked up at the man who had just saved her. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words caught in her throat. For a long moment, she said nothing. It was as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had intervened, that someone had heard her, that someone cared. The billionaire, noticing her silence, gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a small, reassuring smile. His expression softened, his eyes no longer cold but filled with understanding. "You're safe now," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "No one is going to hurt you." The girl's body relaxed just a fraction at the sound of his words, but the fear in her eyes remained. The billionaire could see it, feel it even, but he wasn't going to force her to speak or to trust him just yet. He knew it would take time. He stood up slowly, offering her a hand. "Come with me. I'm taking you somewhere safe." She hesitated, glancing at the man who had been threatening her just moments ago, and then back at the billionaire. Her hand trembled as she reached out, unsure but desperate. She grasped his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with a quiet determination. The billionaire gently led her out of the room and into the hallway, the echoes of their footsteps mingling with the storm outside. As they walked, the girl remained silent, her face turned down, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself as small as possible. The billionaire, sensing her discomfort, didn't rush her. He simply walked beside her, his steps steady and unwavering, offering the only thing he could, his presence. They reached the staircase, and the girl's eyes darted around, taking in her surroundings. The grand staircase, the polished marble floors, the tall windows that seemed to stretch into infinity, all of it was so different from the life she had known. It felt like a dream, a place where she didn't belong. But as she looked up at the billionaire, she saw something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't going to abandon her, not like the others. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire's gaze softened. "Somewhere you can be safe, somewhere you don't have to be afraid." He didn't say it, but the words hung in the air. He would protect her, no matter what it took. The girl nodded, though her confusion was evident. She wasn't sure who this man was, what he wanted, or why he had stepped in to help her. All she knew was that, for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had stopped to listen. Someone had cared. The billionaire led her into a room at the end of the hall, a room with soft lighting, a warm fire crackling in the hearth. The girl hesitated before stepping inside, but the billionaire didn't push her. He simply waited. She glanced at him once more, and then, with a small sigh, stepped into the room. It was a far cry from the harsh, cold streets she had known. There was a bed with plush blankets, a chair by the window, and a desk filled with books. The room was warm, inviting, and yet, it felt foreign. "I don't belong here," the girl whispered to herself. The billionaire, hearing her, smiled gently. "Everyone deserves a place to belong." He left her in the room with a soft promise. "Rest. We'll talk when you're ready." As he stepped out and closed the door behind him, the girl sat on the edge of the bed, her small body trembling as she tried to make sense of everything. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that made it hard to focus. But one thing was clear, her life had just changed. She wasn't sure how or why, but in that moment, she knew she had been given a chance she hadn't thought possible. And somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could trust this man. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. The next morning, the sun peeked through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The little girl lay awake, her eyes wide open as she stared at the ceiling. The storm had passed, but the uncertainty still clung to her like a shadow. She wasn't sure what to feel anymore. The room was warm, the air smelled faintly of fresh linens and firewood, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Her hands were tightly gripping the edge of the bed, her fingers white with the tension. She had never been in a room like this before. Everything was so clean, so new, so different. A part of her wanted to run, to go back to the streets she knew, where everything made sense. But another part of her, the part that had been holding on to hope, that had dared to trust just a little bit, told her to stay. The billionaire's words echoed in her mind. "You're safe now." But was she? Was this really her new life, or was it just another lie waiting to unfold? Just as her thoughts began to spiral, she heard a knock at the door. The billionaire's voice, calm and steady, called from the other side. "It's me. Are you awake?" She didn't respond immediately. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she felt like a little bird trapped in a cage, unsure of what to do next. But then, with a deep breath, she pushed herself off the bed and walked slowly to the door. She opened it, just a crack, peeking out to see the man who had saved her life standing in the hallway. He was dressed in a simple black shirt and pants, his face warm but serious. "Come on," he said gently. "I made breakfast." She hesitated, then stepped out into the hallway. He led her downstairs to a large dining room. The table was set with plates of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit, a large pot of coffee steaming in the center. The room smelled rich and inviting, and for the first time in a long while, her stomach growled with hunger. She wasn't sure if it was the food that smelled so good or the warmth of the room, but she couldn't help but feel a little bit of hope stir inside her. As she sat down at the table, the billionaire pulled out the chair across from her and sat down as well. "I'm sorry for all that's happened," he said softly, his voice full of empathy. "I don't know your story, but I know it hasn't been easy. I want to help." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions she didn't know how to ask. She had never been one to talk much, especially about her past, but there was something about the way he looked at her, so kind, so genuine, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it was a sad smile, one that seemed to carry years of unspoken pain. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he replied, "and because I owe it to someone." She stared at him, trying to understand, but her mind couldn't quite make sense of it. "Someone," she repeated. He nodded. "Someone I loved. Someone I lost." There was a long pause, and for the first time, the billionaire seemed to shrink back, his gaze distant. She could see the pain in his eyes, the grief he carried so quietly. She didn't know why, but seeing that pain made her feel a little less alone. She didn't have to speak to understand. "I was hoping you'd let me help you," he said finally, his voice steady again. "You don't have to explain anything to me. Just take the time you need. You're not alone anymore." His words, simple as they were, hit her harder than she expected. She had never had anyone offer her help like this before, not without expecting something in return. But with him, there was no catch. Just kindness. Just the promise of safety. The little girl blinked back the sudden surge of emotion. She had learned a long time ago not to expect much from the world. But now, sitting at this table with a man who seemed to care, who had stepped into her life without hesitation, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be different. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of change. "Thank you," she whispered, the words almost foreign on her lips. The billionaire smiled, his eyes softening. "You're welcome. Now let's eat." They sat together, the warmth of the room and the food filling the silence between them. As the minutes passed, she began to relax, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe without fear. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The days passed, each one a little easier than the last. The little girl, who had once been so afraid to speak, now found herself opening up to the billionaire in small ways. They had breakfast together every morning, and though she never said much, she started to trust him. The tension that had once gripped her chest began to loosen, bit by bit, like the slow uncoiling of a spring. The billionaire never pushed her, never forced her to talk about her past. He simply let her be, offering small gestures of kindness, like a warm meal or a blanket when the nights grew cold. But one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the light cast long shadows through the tall windows, something changed. The girl was sitting in the living room, sketching a picture with the crayons the billionaire had bought her. Her small hands moved carefully, the tip of the crayon dancing across the page. She was drawing a tree, its branches wide and strong, reaching toward the sky. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was making something that mattered. The billionaire entered the room quietly, watching her for a moment before speaking. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice soft, as if not wanting to disturb her. She paused, glancing up at him. Her eyes were still cautious, but there was a small flicker of something, trust, maybe, sparkling in them. "A tree," she said quietly, "with big branches." The billionaire smiled, moving closer to take a look. He knelt down beside her, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. "It's beautiful," he said, his tone genuine. "You know, I used to draw a lot when I was younger. It helps you see things differently." The girl stared at the page for a long moment, then back at him. "Why?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop it. "Why what?" the billionaire replied, his eyes soft with understanding. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for a moment. The billionaire didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see you," he said finally. "I see who you are, and I see the strength in you." The girl didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. It was hard to put into words the way she was feeling, grateful, confused, a little scared, but at the same time, something in his words resonated deep inside her. She hadn't felt seen in a long time, not like this. The billionaire gently reached over and placed his hand on the sketchbook, his finger tracing the outline of the tree. "This tree," he said, "it's like you. Strong, even when things get hard." The girl's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in days, her guard came down just a little bit. She allowed herself to believe, if only for a moment, that he might be telling the truth. She smiled, a small but real smile, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and softened her face. It was the first time in a long time that she smiled like that, without the fear of what might happen next. The billionaire stood up slowly, giving her space. "Take your time," he said quietly, Whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here." She nodded, her eyes lingering on the page in front of her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the person she'd always wanted to be. Maybe, just maybe, this tree she was drawing could be more than just a picture. It could be a symbol of hope, of strength, and of a future that was no longer defined by fear. As the days turned into weeks, she began to trust the billionaire more. She started to speak about her past, in bits and pieces, when she felt ready. She told him about the streets, about the cold nights she spent hiding from the world, about the fear that had never quite left her. And through it all, he listened. He didn't judge, didn't rush her. He simply listened. But even more than that, he cared. It wasn't just about offering her shelter or food. It was about offering her something she had never had before, a chance. A chance to start over. A chance to be more than just a girl hiding from the storm. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the billionaire looked at her with a gentle smile. "You know," he said, "you remind me of my daughter." The girl looked up, surprised. "Your daughter?" she asked. The billionaire nodded. "Yes, she was a lot like you, strong, independent, and always believing that there was more to life than what she saw. But she's gone now." His voice broke for a moment, the pain of the memory still fresh in his eyes. "I lost her a long time ago, and I regret not being there for her." The girl's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She didn't know what to say, but she felt an overwhelming desire to comfort him. She reached out, her small hand resting gently on his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The billionaire looked at her, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've helped me more than you'll ever know." And in that moment, the girl knew that she had found something she had never thought possible, a family. The days that followed felt different. The girl no longer stared at the walls of the grand house with the same level of wariness. She still held some of her guard up, of course, but there was something in the air, something soft and hopeful. It wasn't that she had forgotten her past, or that the scars of it had magically disappeared, but rather that, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was allowed to breathe, to exist, without the constant weight of fear pressing on her chest. The billionaire had kept his promise. He hadn't forced her to speak about her past or rush into a future she wasn't ready for. Instead, he offered her the one thing she had never really known: time. She had spent years running from one storm to the next, never knowing where the next blow would come from. But here, in this house, there was a sense of calm. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. One afternoon, as she sat in the living room with a book she had borrowed from the bookshelf, the billionaire entered with a smile on his face. He had been busy with work, but had found a moment to check in on her. "How's the book?" he asked, walking over to where she was sitting. She glanced up at him, her eyes softening. "It's good," she said, her voice steady. "It's about a girl who learns to survive in a world that doesn't seem to care." The billionaire raised an eyebrow. "Sounds familiar," he said with a half-smile. The girl didn't answer, but the smile on her face told him everything he needed to know. There was a lightness in her now that hadn't been there before. The book was her way of escaping, of finding solace in a world that, for a little while, wasn't so cruel. He sat down across from her, his gaze warm. "I'm glad you're starting to enjoy your time here," he said, his voice sincere. "You've been through a lot, and you deserve some peace." The girl nodded, though she still couldn't fully articulate what she was feeling. She had lived in survival mode for so long that it was hard to understand what it meant to simply be, to not always be looking over her shoulder or wondering when the next storm would hit. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said quietly, almost as if the words were foreign to her. "You don't need to thank me," the billionaire replied. "You belong here." The simplicity of his words struck her, and for a moment, she just stared at him, trying to make sense of the emotion that surged in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered, her eyes downcast. The billionaire's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "That's not true," he said firmly. "Everyone has a place. Sometimes it takes a little longer to find it, but you belong here. You're part of this family." The girl's breath hitched in her throat at the word family. It was something she had never truly had. Her mother had done her best, but they had always been on the run, always moving from one temporary home to the next, never staying long enough for anything to feel like it could be permanent. But what if I don't fit in? She asked, her voice small. What if I'm just too different? The billionaire smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. We're all different, he said. But that doesn't mean we can't belong. Your past doesn't define you, and neither does mine. What matters is who you are right now. And right now, you are someone who deserves love, safety, and a chance to be whoever you want to be. The girl looked at him, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and hope. She had never heard anyone speak like this before, not to her. She had spent so many years being told she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong, that she would never amount to anything. But here, in this house, with this man, it was different. He wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He was offering her something more. He was offering her the chance to belong. I don't know what to do with all this, she said quietly, her fingers nervously tracing the edges of the book. I'm not used to feeling safe. The billionaire's expression softened, and he reached out, gently placing a hand on hers. You don't have to figure it all out today, he said. You don't have to figure it out at all. Just take it one step at a time. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in a long time, the girl felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't everything. There were still many things she didn't understand, many fears she didn't know how to face. But in that moment, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe she could finally stop running and start living. She looked up at the billionaire, her eyes wide and sincere. Thank you, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. You don't have to thank me, he replied, his smile gentle. You're worth it. And for the first time in a long time, the girl believed him. The following weeks felt like a blur. For the first time, the girl found herself waking up with a sense of calm instead of dread. The billionaire, her unexpected savior, had kept his promise. He had shown her more than just kindness. He had shown her what it felt like to be valued, to be seen. But despite the warmth of the home and the comfort of his presence, something was still holding her back. She couldn't completely shake off the memories of the life she had left behind. It was like an invisible chain, one that kept pulling her back to the past every time she started to feel safe. The billionaire must have sensed it, because one evening, after dinner, he sat down with her. His face was serious, but kind. You've been quieter lately, he said, his voice gentle. Is everything okay? She hesitated, unsure how to answer. She wasn't used to being asked about her feelings, let alone being offered the chance to express them. I don't know, she said quietly, her gaze downcast. It's just, sometimes, I feel like I'm waiting for something bad to happen. Like this all feels too good to be true. The billionaire nodded, his expression understanding. He had been patient with her so far, letting her move at her own pace. But now, he could see that she was struggling, that she was still carrying the weight of her past, even in this new life he had given her. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he said, his voice steady. This is real, and it's not going anywhere. She looked up at him, the uncertainty in her eyes slowly giving way to something else, something closer to trust. But the walls she had built were still there, stubborn and thick. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she could finally have a life free of fear, but deep down, a part of her was still holding back. I've never had a place that felt like home, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never had a place where I didn't have to worry about losing it. The billionaire's eyes softened. He had been there before, in a way. He had known what it felt like to lose everything, to wonder if happiness was even possible. I know, he said quietly, but I want you to know that you don't have to worry about that here. This is your home, and it always will be. The girl's breath caught in her throat at the sincerity in his voice. She had never had anyone offer her something like this. Not truly. And for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. Imagine a life where she didn't have to constantly look over her shoulder, where she wasn't afraid of the next bad thing that would happen. She could see it in her mind's eye, a life with no more fear, no more pain. But it was hard. So hard. But what if I mess it up? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. What if I'm not enough? The billionaire reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You are enough, he said firmly. You always have been. She looked at him, feeling something shift inside her. It wasn't an instant change, but it was enough to make her feel like she wasn't alone in this anymore. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about taking the first step toward healing. The next few days were quiet, but full of small moments that started to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. One morning, as they were having breakfast, the billionaire mentioned something about his past, about the losses he had endured, the mistakes he had made, and the way he had built himself back up. She listened, really listened for the first time, and something in his story resonated with her. It wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about the people who had come and gone in his life, and the realization that even the hardest of times could lead to something better. After breakfast, they went for a walk in the garden behind the house. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and for the first time in ages, she didn't feel like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. The billionaire talked about his plans for the future, his business, his charity work, but he also talked about simple things, like planting trees and watching them grow. As they walked, he pointed out the flowers blooming in the yard, the birds flying overhead. "It's amazing, isn't it?" he said with a smile. "How something so small can grow into something beautiful." The girl looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think that's what's happening here?" she asked quietly. "Do you think I'm growing?" The billionaire smiled softly, his eyes warm. "I think you've been growing all along. You just didn't have the space to see it." She felt a knot in her chest loosen at his words. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to grow too. The billionaire was right about one thing. She had been through a lot. But now, she was in a place where she could start to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the past would creep up on her. But with every passing day, she felt a little bit more like herself. She felt like she was finally becoming the person she had always wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that she deserved it. The air was heavy that evening, as if the world was holding its breath. The girl had felt it for days now. A shift, a tension that she couldn't quite put her finger on. The billionaire had kept his promise. He had given her the space to grow, to heal, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she could find her way. But still, something gnawed at her. Something felt wrong, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on the warmth of the house and the kindness of the billionaire, but the weight of the past still clung to her. There were things she hadn't shared with him, things she couldn't bring herself to say. And deep down, she knew there were secrets, things he had yet to tell her. It was one evening after dinner when she finally saw the change. The billionaire, usually calm and collected, was standing at the window, looking out into the darkness of the night. She noticed his posture, the way his shoulders were stiff, the way his gaze didn't move. She had never seen him like this before. He seemed distant, lost in thought, and for the first time, she wondered if she really knew him at all. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should interrupt him, but her curiosity got the better of her. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. The billionaire turned slowly, as if startled by her presence. He gave her a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he said, but the words felt hollow. "Are you sure?" she pressed, stepping closer. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "There are things I need to deal with," he said, his voice low. "Things from the past." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that the billionaire had a history, that he carried burdens of his own, but hearing him speak so openly about it made something shift inside her. "What kind of things?" she asked carefully, not wanting to pry, but feeling a growing sense of concern. The billionaire turned back toward the window, his eyes gazing into the night, as if the answers were hidden somewhere out there. "Things I thought were long gone," he said quietly. "But they're still here. They always have been." The girl felt a pang of empathy. She knew all too well what it was like to carry the weight of the past, to have secrets that refused to stay buried. She had lived with that feeling her entire life. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said softly, her voice steady. The billionaire looked at her then, his gaze sharp, as if seeing her for the first time in a way that made him wonder about her, about the depth of her own pain. "I've been alone for a long time," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe that's why I don't know how to fix this." She stepped closer, not knowing what exactly compelled her to reach out, but something in her told her that this was the moment. This was the moment she could offer something back, something she had never thought she could give. "You don't have to fix it," she said, her voice gentle. "You just need to let someone help." The billionaire stood there, unmoving, for a long moment. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time, The girl saw a vulnerability in him that she hadn't expected. He wasn't just the powerful man who had saved her. He was someone who had been hurt, someone who had carried his own pain for far too long. And in that moment, she realized that they weren't so different after all. They were both just people trying to find their way through a world that had been unkind to them. The billionaire finally broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be different. How to move past everything." She smiled, her eyes soft. "You're already doing it," she said. "You're already here." The billionaire turned away from the window, his face thoughtful. "Maybe I am," he murmured. "Maybe I've been afraid of change for too long." The girl felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, she knew that they were both on the same journey. They were both learning how to heal, how to trust again, and most importantly, how to let go of the past. And in that quiet moment between them, something shifted. It wasn't a grand gesture or a grand revelation. It was simply the realization that they weren't alone anymore. They had each other. As the night stretched on, the billionaire finally turned back to her, a small but genuine smile on his face. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for reminding me that I don't have to do this alone." The girl smiled back, her heart light. "We'll figure it out together," she said, her voice steady and strong. "One step at a time." And for the first time, both of them felt the weight of the past lift, just a little. They didn't have all the answers, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, they knew that they could face them together. The future was uncertain, but it no longer seemed as frightening as it once had. Together, they could begin to rebuild. Together, they could finally start to heal. Days passed, and the weight of the past seemed to settle a little lighter on both of them. The billionaire and the girl had been living in a delicate balance, each of them tiptoeing around the unspoken words and memories that haunted their lives. They had become accustomed to the quiet moments, the calm routine of everyday life, and for the first time, there was a sense of normalcy. But the girl knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be that simple. The past didn't let go so easily. There were still questions, still pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. One morning, as they sat down for breakfast, the atmosphere in the room felt heavier than usual. The billionaire looked at the girl, his eyes soft, but there was an edge of something else in them. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice steady but laced with hesitation. The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that the billionaire had his own burdens, his own secrets. She had never expected him to tell her everything, but there was a part of her that feared the truth. She set her cup of coffee down, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to speak. "It's about your family," he said quietly. The girl's breath caught in her throat, her mind immediately racing. "What about them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "I know who your father is." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and for a moment, the girl couldn't speak. Her mind flashed to the years spent on the streets, the uncertainty, the fear. Her father had been a ghost in her life, someone she had never known, someone who had never been there. "Do you know him?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The billionaire nodded slowly. "I didn't want to tell you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth." The girl's heart pounded in her chest, a strange mixture of fear and curiosity coursing through her. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. The billionaire took another deep breath. "He was someone I used to work with, a business partner. We were close once, but things went wrong." His voice trailed off, the weight of the words pressing down on him. "What do you mean, went wrong?" she asked, her eyes searching his. The billionaire's gaze shifted, and for the first time, she saw the conflict in his eyes. "It's complicated," he said, his voice low. "There were decisions made that led to things falling apart. I haven't seen him in years. But when I found you, I knew. I knew you were his daughter." The girl felt a chill run down her spine. Her mind was spinning, and yet, she couldn't make sense of it all. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice small, almost lost in the silence of the room. The billionaire looked at her with regret in his eyes. "I didn't want to bring up the past. I didn't want to hurt you," he said quietly. "But I think it's time you know. You deserve to know the truth." The girl sat there, her mind racing as she tried to process the words. Her father, someone she had never known, someone who had never been a part of her life. It was like a piece of her past, something she had buried deep inside, was suddenly brought to the surface. "So what does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire's gaze softened. "It means you're not alone," he said gently. "You have a family, even if it's complicated." The girl's heart twisted in her chest, a mix of emotions bubbling up. She had spent so long thinking she was alone, believing that no one cared, that no one would ever be there for her. But now, here was this man, offering her a place in his life, offering her a family. It was a lot to take in. "I don't know what to do with this," she said, her voice cracking. "I've never had a family." The billionaire reached out, gently taking her hand. "You have one now," he said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The girl's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to cry. She cried for the years lost, for the pain that had haunted her, for the father she had never known. But she also cried for the hope that had suddenly blossomed inside her, for the possibility of a future where she wasn't alone. The billionaire sat beside her, his hand still holding hers, his presence a steady reassurance. "We'll figure this out together," he said, his voice steady. "One step at a time." And in that moment, the girl realized something. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face the world alone anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she could have the family she had always dreamed of. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet adjustments and unexpected discoveries. The girl had started to settle into the life she had once thought was impossible. The house, once overwhelming, now felt like something she could call home. She had begun to share more with the billionaire, each conversation peeling back the layers of the past, both his and hers. But there were still moments when the weight of her old life would come crashing back, and she would retreat into herself. It wasn't always easy, but she was learning to live in the present, to let go of the constant fear that had once defined her. One afternoon, as she sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, the billionaire came in and sat beside her. He looked at her, his face soft with concern. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice gentle. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the view outside. "I guess I'm just thinking." "About what?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure of how to explain the mix of emotions that swirled inside her. "Everything," she said finally. "About my dad. About you. About what happens next." The billionaire sighed, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said. "It's a lot to take in, and I know it's not easy." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for the answers she couldn't find on her own. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "I feel like I'm stuck between who I was and who I'm supposed to be." The billionaire reached out and placed his hand on hers, his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "You just have to take it one step at a time, and know that you're not alone in this." She felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket, a reminder that she didn't have to face everything on her own. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to be cared for, but now, with him, she was starting to believe that it was okay to lean on someone. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the girl began to feel more at home in her new life. She spent her mornings reading books, her afternoons learning how to cook with the billionaire's guidance, and her evenings sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. But even as she found solace in these routines, there were moments when she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she asked him a question that had been on her mind for days. "What happened with my dad?" she asked softly. The billionaire's face hardened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "It's not easy to explain," he said. "There were things that went wrong, things that hurt both of us. But I'll tell you this, I never meant for you to be part of it. You didn't deserve that." She nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had never known her father, never understood the choices he had made, and yet, there was a part of her that still wondered if she could have had a different life, a better life. "Do you think I could have had a better life?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You have a better life now," he said firmly. "This is your chance to be who you want to be, and you deserve that chance." The girl felt a rush of emotion at his words, but she pushed it down, trying to maintain control. It was hard to let go of the idea that her life could have been different, but deep down, she knew he was right. This was her chance. The next morning, The girl woke up to a new sense of determination. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of it. The billionaire had given her something she had never had before, hope. And with that hope, she was ready to start building her own future. Later that day, as they walked through the garden, she stopped and turned to him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for giving me a chance." The billionaire smiled, his eyes warm. "You've earned it," he said. "You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." And in that moment, the girl realized that she wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was becoming someone she had never thought she could be. Someone strong, someone worthy of love and belonging. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the past would always be a part of her. But with the billionaire by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would continue to build something new, something filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future where they weren't defined by their pasts, but by who they were becoming. The days seemed to stretch into one another, their rhythm now familiar and comforting. The girl had found something she hadn't realized she was missing: peace. It was strange at first, the stillness of it, the absence of fear that had once been so constant in her life. But it was starting to feel like something she could hold on to. She had spent so many years surviving, moving from one moment of crisis to the next, never really stopping to breathe. But now, as she woke each morning in the comfort of the house that had become her home, she was slowly learning how to live again. The billionaire, her adoptive father, had been her steady anchor through it all. He hadn't pushed her, hadn't tried to rush her through the pain or the healing. He had simply been there, offering her the space she needed to find herself. The bond between them had grown, not just as father and daughter, but as two people who had both experienced loss, who had both been broken by the past, but were now learning to rebuild together. They spent their days in quiet companionship, often talking about small things, like what books she was reading or what she wanted to learn next. The girl had always been quiet, but now, she was finding her voice in ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, the girl turned to the billionaire, her eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice steady. The billionaire looked up from the book he was reading, his expression curious. "What's on your mind?" he asked. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I want to go to school," she said quietly. The words felt like they had been waiting on her tongue for weeks. She had never been to school, not in the way that most kids did. Her education had been scattered, pieced together from the moments of stability she could find, but it had never been enough. Now, sitting in the safety of the life the billionaire had offered her, she realized that for the first time, she could dream about more than just surviving. The billionaire put down his book, his eyes softening. "You want to go to school?" he repeated, as if testing the idea. She nodded. "I've never had the chance before," she said. "But now, I feel like I want to try." The billionaire smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Of course, we can make that happen," he said. "You deserve the chance to learn, to have everything that's been taken from you." The girl felt her heart swell at his words, but there was a part of her that still felt uncertain. She had never really thought about the future before, never dared to imagine what it might hold. But now, with his encouragement, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe in that future. As the days passed, the girl worked with the billionaire to prepare for school. They met with tutors who helped her catch up on the subjects she had missed, and the billionaire even arranged for her to visit a nearby school to meet with the principal. The process was slow, but with each step, she felt a little more confident, a little more hopeful. But even with all the progress, there was still something lurking in the back of her mind. Something that told her this new life, this new beginning, might not last. She couldn't help but wonder if the past was really behind her, or if it would come rushing back, threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. It was on the day of her first meeting with the principal that she felt it. The weight of the past. It was in the way she hesitated as she stood outside the school, looking up at the large building, feeling like an outsider. It was in the way her hands trembled as she reached for the door, like she was stepping into a world that didn't belong to her. She could hear the billionaire behind her, his footsteps steady and calm. "You don't have to be nervous," he said, his voice low but reassuring. She turned to look at him, his face warm and kind. "I'm not nervous," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, his eyes twinkling with understanding. It's okay to be nervous, he said. But remember, you're not doing this alone. You've got me. She nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The principal was kind and patient, taking the time to explain everything to the girl, showing her the school, and introducing her to a few of the teachers. As they walked through the hallways, the girl's anxiety slowly began to fade. The walls, once so imposing, didn't seem so tall anymore. The faces of the students who passed by seemed less unfamiliar. She was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could fit in here. By the time they left the school, the girl's heart was lighter. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Ready to step into the future, whatever it might hold. As they walked back to the car, the billionaire turned to her with a proud smile. You did great, he said. I'm so proud of you. The girl looked up at him, her heart full. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. I couldn't have done it without you. He smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. You've always had it in you, he said. I'm just here to help you see it. And for the first time, the girl believed him. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And whatever came next, she was ready. The following weeks brought new challenges, but the girl faced them with more courage than she had ever known. Her first day at school had been a turning point, a moment where she had stepped into a new world, a world full of possibilities she had once thought impossible. But with each new day came the reality that her past was never far behind. It lurked in the back of her mind, in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to think about the life she had left. The billionaire, her adoptive father, had been there every step of the way, offering her the support and reassurance she needed. He never pushed her, never asked for anything in return. He simply wanted her to thrive, to embrace the future without the weight of the past holding her back. Yet, there were days when the girl felt the pull of her old life, when she struggled to shake the feeling of not truly belonging. It was on one of these days, as she sat alone in the library after school, that the realization hit her. She wasn't just carrying the weight of her past. She was also carrying the weight of expectations. Expectations of herself. Expectations of what her new life should be. She hadn't asked for any of this, didn't expect to be taken in by a man who had everything, someone who had no obligation to her, yet gave so much. She had always learned to fend for herself, to trust no one. But now, as she sat in the quiet space surrounded by books, she realized that the future wasn't something she could just hope for. It was something she had to create, something she had to believe she deserved. As she walked home that evening, the streets seemed quieter than usual, and she found herself deep in thought. The air was cooler, and a light breeze tugged at the hem of her jacket. The weight in her chest, that heavy uncertainty, had returned. The truth was, she had no idea what the future held. She had no idea what her place in the world was anymore. The past few months had been a whirlwind, and she had been trying to keep up, trying to adjust. But now, standing in front of the mansion she now called home, the girl felt a familiar sense of unease. The door opened, and the billionaire stepped out onto the porch, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw her. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice gentle. She forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was fine," she replied, trying to sound casual. The billionaire raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. "Are you sure? You seem a little distant." She hesitated, her thoughts racing. Should she tell him? Should she open up about the doubt that had been gnawing at her? He had given her everything. Safety, security, a home. But how could she ask him for more? How could she tell him that, despite everything, she still felt like an outsider in her own life? The girl shook her head slightly. "I'm just tired," she said softly. He didn't press her, but he didn't look away either. "Okay," he said, his tone soft but filled with concern. "But if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Always." She nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him, to believe that this was real, that she had a future here, with him. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in someone else's world. The next morning, after a restless night of tossing and turning, she woke up to find the billionaire sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up when she walked in, his smile warm. "Good morning," he said, his voice light. "How did you sleep?" She shrugged, her eyes downcast. "Okay, I guess." "You don't look okay," he said, his voice laced with concern. "Is everything all right?" She stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to tell him the truth, to explain the unease that had settled deep within her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she sat down at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I just don't know," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. The billionaire watched her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to have everything figured out right now," he said gently. "But you do need to know that you don't have to carry it all alone." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. He shook his head. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You're my daughter. And family doesn't just mean being there when things are easy. It means being there through the tough times, too." The girl's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could belong here. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe she didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the past and build a future. The following days were filled with small steps, little victories. She continued her schooling, working closely with the tutors the billionaire had arranged. She started to feel more comfortable in her new surroundings, the mansion no longer feeling like an alien space, but a place she could truly call home. The billionaire continued to be there for her, offering guidance when needed, and always making sure she knew she wasn't alone. But the girl still carried the weight of her own insecurities. It was an invisible burden, one she couldn't fully shake, but with every passing day, she felt herself getting closer to letting go. And as she stood in front of the mirror one night, looking at the person she was becoming, she realized something important. She didn't have to be defined by her past. She was more than the girl who had been abandoned. She was more than the girl who had suffered. She was someone who deserved love, who deserved a future, and who deserved to be happy. And that was a realization that made all the difference. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet tension, the kind that sits at the edges of your mind and refuses to go away. The girl had come a long way since her first day in the mansion, but the shadows of her past still lingered. She had started to see a future for herself, but with each step forward, she was reminded of how much of her life had been shaped by pain, fear, and uncertainty. It wasn't easy to shake that off, even in the warmth and safety of the home the billionaire had given her. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, the billionaire turned to her with a look that was both gentle and serious. "I think it's time we talk about the next step," he said. She looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. She had been avoiding this conversation for a while, not because she didn't want to face it, but because she was afraid of what it might mean. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious. The billionaire paused for a moment, considering his words. "You've been here for a while now," he said, "and I think it's time we start thinking about the future. You've made so much progress, and I'm proud of you." She could feel the warmth in his words, but there was a part of her that hesitated. The past was still so close, so raw, and the idea of moving forward felt like taking another giant leap into the unknown. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted quietly. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice soft. "For the future. For everything." The billionaire smiled, a smile that held no judgment, only understanding. "You're not alone in this," he said. "And you don't have to rush. But it's okay to start thinking about what comes next. You've shown so much strength, and now it's time for you to find your place." The girl looked down, her thoughts racing. She had always lived in survival mode, always moving from one crisis to the next, never stopping to think about what she truly wanted. The billionaire had given her a chance to breathe, to heal, but the future was still a blur. What did she want? Could she even begin to dream of a life that wasn't shaped by survival? "I'm not sure where to begin," she whispered. The billionaire reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "That's okay. You don't need to know everything right now. But you do have a choice. You've always had a choice." His words struck something deep within her, something she had buried for so long. A choice. She had never thought of her life that way, as something she could choose, something she could control. But now, sitting here with him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could choose. She could choose a future that wasn't dictated by her past. "Do you think I can do it?" she asked, her voice small but filled with a spark of hope. The billionaire's smile deepened. "I know you can." His confidence in her was both overwhelming and comforting. He had given her the foundation she needed to rebuild, But now it was up to her to take the next steps. It was scary, the thought of stepping into the unknown, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and living meant having choices. The following weeks were a time of quiet change. She continued her schooling, working hard to catch up with the lessons she had missed, but she also began to think more about what she wanted for her future. The mansion, once a place that had felt so foreign to her, now felt like a home. The billionaire had become not just a guardian, but a father, and the bond between them had deepened in ways that words could not fully express. But there were moments when the girl would stop, when she would pause and wonder if she was truly ready to take the next step. The past still tugged at her, still whispered in the back of her mind. She had spent so many years running from it, trying to bury it, but now she realized that in order to move forward, she had to face it. And so, one quiet afternoon, she sat down with the billionaire in the library, the place where they had spent so many hours together, talking, learning, and growing. "I think it's time I tell you everything," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The billionaire looked at her with soft eyes, his expression open, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You don't have to," he said gently, "but I'm here, whenever you're ready." The girl nodded, feeling the weight of her past press down on her. She had spent so long hiding from it, afraid of what it might mean to confront it. But now, she felt like it was time. She told him everything. The years spent on the streets, the fear, the loss, the longing for a family she had never known. As she spoke, the weight on her chest slowly began to lift. It wasn't easy, reliving the past, but in telling her story, she felt a sense of release. The billionaire listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face, his expression soft and understanding. When she finished, there was a long silence between them. She waited for his response, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, the billionaire spoke, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because of what you've been through, but because of who you've become. You've survived, and now you're ready to live." The girl felt a surge of emotion, but this time, it wasn't sadness. It was a feeling of strength, of release. She had faced the past and survived it. And now, she was ready for the future. With the billionaire by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. The girl's life had changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. What had once felt like an endless, uncertain journey was now a path filled with purpose, though it still felt unfamiliar. As she adjusted to this new life, there was a constant undercurrent of fear that it might all slip away, that the peace she had found might be temporary. It was on a quiet afternoon, as she sat in the garden, that the storm she had been dreading began to roll in. The billionaire had been distant for the past few days, his mood darkening. He was still the same man who had welcomed her into his life, but there were moments when he seemed burdened by something she couldn't see, and it had left her restless. She sat under the large oak tree, her fingers idly tracing the edges of a book, when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway caught her attention. She stood up, squinting into the sunlight as she saw the sleek black car approach the front steps. A man stepped out, tall and imposing, with a face she didn't recognize. He had a look of authority about him, his movements controlled, his eyes scanning the house as though he was here on business. The girl's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know who he was, but she could tell from his demeanor that he was important, and that his visit was not just a casual one. The billionaire was waiting for him at the door, his expression unreadable. As the man approached, the girl's unease grew. Something was wrong, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. She wanted to stay hidden, to avoid whatever was about to happen, but something told her she needed to know what this was. She slowly moved closer, her steps quiet as she stood near the open window, listening. "Is everything ready?" The man's voice was cold, clipped, and direct. The billionaire stood tall in front of him, his face tense. "It's all set," he replied, his voice betraying none of the emotion she knew was there. "I just want to make sure this goes smoothly." The man nodded, but the girl could tell that the conversation was more serious than it appeared. She had heard enough to know that whatever was happening was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. As the man turned and started to walk away, the girl moved quickly to the front door, her curiosity pushing her forward. She didn't want to be left in the dark, not now, not after everything she had fought for. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice small but determined, as she stepped into the hallway where the billionaire was standing. The billionaire looked up, his face softening when he saw her, but there was still a hint of something guarded in his eyes. "Someone from my past," he said, his tone unreadable. "You don't need to worry about him." But she could tell he was lying. The unease that had been simmering within her now began to boil over. She had lived too many years being lied to, being kept in the dark, and she wasn't going to let it happen again. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice firmer now. "You've been distant, and I can tell something's not right." The billionaire sighed, his expression softening. He stepped forward, placing his hands on her shoulders, his touch warm but heavy. "It's nothing for you to worry about," he said, his voice full of affection but tinged with an unmistakable sadness. "I just need to take care of a few things. Things from before you came into my life." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "But I'm part of your life now," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't want to be left out of whatever this is. I want to help." The billionaire paused, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment as though he was searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with emotion. "I never wanted you to be involved in any of this," he said. "I wanted to protect you from it, keep you safe. But now, I see that you're part of this, whether I want you to be or not." The girl's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't know what this was, what past the billionaire was talking about, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let him go through it alone. Not now, not after everything they had been through together. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice steady. "I want to be here. I want to be a part of your life, and I want you to know that I'm here, no matter what happens." The billionaire's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked almost relieved. "You're stronger than I give you credit for," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to feel burdened by my past. But now I see that you're ready to face it. We'll face it together." They stood there for a long moment, the weight of their shared history pressing in on them. She had always been told she couldn't have the family she dreamed of, but now, she realized that the billionaire was offering her something far greater than she had ever hoped for. Not just safety or security, but the chance to stand together in the face of whatever the future held. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for not pushing me away." The billionaire smiled softly, his hand resting gently on her head. "Thank you for staying by my side." Together, they stood at the threshold of the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm that had seemed so threatening just hours before now felt like something they could weather together, as long as they had each other. The tension that had been building between them finally came to a head when the billionaire received a phone call late one evening. He had been distant for days, and the girl had sensed that something was coming, though she couldn't put her finger on it. The phone call was short, but she could see the change in his face the moment he hung up. His usual calm demeanor had cracked, and for the first time in a long while, she saw fear in his eyes. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was about to unfold, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to face it alone. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. The billionaire hesitated, his eyes darting to the phone as if he were considering whether or not to tell her. Finally, he met her gaze, his expression heavy. "It's about the past," he said, his voice tight. "I thought I had put it all behind me, but it's come back. I have to deal with it." She stepped forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a person from my past," he said, his voice strained. "Someone I thought was gone for good. But they're back, and they're not alone. And they're threatening everything I've worked for." The girl's mind raced. She didn't know who this person was, but she could see the fear in the billionaire's eyes, and that was enough to tell her this was serious. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. The billionaire looked at her, his face filled with a mix of gratitude and regret. "I need you to stay safe," he said, his voice firm but filled with affection. "This is something I have to take care of. I don't want you to be involved." The girl shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "You're not alone in this." For a moment, the billionaire didn't speak, his eyes searching hers as if he were trying to find a reason to argue. But there was no argument. She wasn't going anywhere. They had been through too much together for him to push her away now. "Okay," he said finally, his voice softening. "But promise me you'll stay out of harm's way." She nodded, a sense of resolve building inside her. "I promise." The days that followed were filled with strange and unsettling phone calls. The billionaire became more distant, more consumed by whatever was happening with this person from his past. The girl could see it in his eyes. He was trying to protect her, but he was also protecting something deeper, something buried. She didn't ask questions. She knew better, but she could feel the danger creeping closer. It wasn't just about the billionaire anymore. It was about her, too. One afternoon, as she was walking through the house, she overheard a conversation between the billionaire and a man she had never seen before. The man's voice was low and harsh, and the words he spoke sent a chill down her spine. "You don't understand," the man said, his tone cold and unforgiving. "This isn't just about you anymore. You've got something I want, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it." The girl froze in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't make out the rest of the conversation, but she didn't need to hear more. She knew enough. Whoever this person was, they were dangerous, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. That night, as the billionaire returned home, the girl was waiting for him. She knew he wouldn't want to talk about what had happened, but she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She had to know what was going on. "Who was that man?" she asked, her voice firm as he stepped through the door. The billionaire's face tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might brush her off. But then, he looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of vulnerability. "Someone I used to trust," he said quietly. "Someone who knows too much. They've come for what I've built." The girl stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He wants control," the billionaire said, his voice filled with frustration. "He wants to take everything. He wants to destroy everything I've worked for." She felt a wave of anger surge inside her. "We can't let him do that," she said, her voice steady and full of determination. "We'll figure it out. Together." The billionaire's eyes softened at her words. "I don't want you involved in this," he said, his voice filled with regret. "You've already been through enough." She shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I've been through a lot," she said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere. This is our fight now." For a long moment, the billionaire didn't speak. He just looked at her, his expression softening as he took in her words. And then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said finally. "We do this together." The next few days were filled with tension as the billionaire prepared for what was coming. He had hired a team of people to protect the house, to keep an eye out for any threats. But the girl knew that no matter how much preparation they made, they couldn't hide from the storm that was coming. They had to face it head on. The day the storm hit was nothing like she had imagined. It came quietly at first, small, subtle signs that something was off. But soon enough, the tension exploded. The man from the billionaire's past had made his move. And now, it was a fight for everything they had. The tension in the air grew thicker by the day. The girl could feel it, the weight of it pressing down on them as the billionaire prepared for the final confrontation with the man from his past. Every day, it seemed, there was a new development, a new twist in the battle that had consumed their lives for what felt like forever. But despite the constant threat, despite the fear that hung over them like a storm cloud, the girl stood strong. She had come too far to let this ruin everything she had worked for, everything they had built together. She had faced too much, fought too hard, and now, she was ready to stand by him, to face whatever came next. The billionaire had made it clear that he didn't want her involved in the mess with his past. He wanted to protect her from it all, but she wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't someone who could be kept in the dark, locked away for safety. She had already lived through the hardest parts of her life, and now she was ready to face the consequences of standing up for herself, for the family she had found. She had learned from him, the strength, the quiet resilience. She had learned that there was no escaping the past, but there was a way to face it. She was ready for whatever came their way. The night before the final showdown, the billionaire sat down with her in the living room, his expression worn but resolute. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice low, eyes locked on hers. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about you too. If this doesn't go as planned, things will change." The girl met his gaze, unwavering. She had seen the fear in his eyes earlier, but now, she saw something else, something she had never seen before, the fear of losing her. She had never been so sure of anything in her life. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, but firmly. "We'll handle this together." He stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time, as if realizing the truth in her words. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said quietly, almost to himself. She smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to do anything without me. We're in this together." The next day, the storm finally hit. The confrontation came in the form of a phone call. The man was here, waiting, demanding what he wanted. The billionaire was ready, his plans in place, but it was clear from the way his jaw tightened that nothing was guaranteed. The girl stood beside him as they prepared to leave, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They walked out of the house, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the yard. The billionaire's hand was steady on her shoulder as they approached the car, but she could feel the tension radiating off of him. This was the moment everything would change. As they drove toward the location where the man had requested they meet, the girl couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had never been this close to something so dangerous, so full of risk. But she had made her choice. She had made the choice to be here, to stand with the man who had given her a chance at a future. The car pulled up to a dark, quiet parking lot, the only sound the hum of the engine as it idled. They stepped out, and the girl could see the figure in the distance, tall, menacing, standing in the shadows. The billionaire stiffened beside her, but she noticed that his posture was different now. He wasn't the same man who had been so lost in his past, so unsure of what to do. He was focused. He was ready. They approached the figure, and the man turned slowly, his face twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice cold. The girl could see the way the billionaire's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't react. He stood tall, his voice calm as he spoke. "I'm not here to negotiate," he said firmly. "This ends today." The man laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You really think you can walk away from this, don't you? You think you can just leave it all behind?" The billionaire's eyes narrowed. "It's already behind me," he said, his voice steady. "And you're going to stay out of my life. Now." The man stepped forward, his smile widening. "You think you're in control here? This was never just about you. It's about what you've built, what you have now." The girl's heart raced. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. She could see the billionaire was holding his ground, but she knew they were running out of time. The situation was escalating quickly. "I've built nothing that belongs to you," the billionaire said, his voice rising. "And I'm not letting you take anything from me again." The man's smile faltered, his eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. "You should have never brought her into this," he spat, pointing at the girl. "She's just as much a part of this as you are." The girl stood tall, beside the billionaire, refusing to back down. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "This is our life, and you have no say in it." The man took a step back, his eyes scanning the two of them with a calculating look. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, with a swift motion, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. The girl and the billionaire stood there, both breathing heavily, unsure of what had just happened. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. He nodded slowly, his expression still tense. "For now," he said. "But we've won. You're safe." The girl felt a rush of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. There was too much at stake, and the future was still uncertain. But as she looked at the billionaire, standing beside her, she knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after the confrontation were eerily quiet. The man from the billionaire's past had vanished, but the tension remained, like a storm that had passed, but left the air thick with unease. The girl could feel it, could see it in the billionaire's eyes. He was still carrying the weight of something that hadn't been fully resolved. But as the weeks went by, life in the mansion started to settle again. The girl continued with her schooling, the rhythm of her days becoming more predictable, more normal. She was no longer just surviving, but living. And for the first time, she allowed herself to truly enjoy the life that had been given to her. It wasn't perfect, and there were still scars from the past that she would carry with her, but she had found peace. One afternoon, as she was sitting on the porch, the billionaire came outside and sat beside her, his usual calm presence radiating warmth. His gaze was distant, as if lost in thought, and for the first time in a long while, the girl noticed how tired he looked. He hadn't said much since the encounter with the man, but she could sense that it was still weighing on him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, turning to look at him. The billionaire didn't immediately respond, his gaze still focused on the horizon. But after a moment, he exhaled deeply and met her eyes. "I'm fine," he said, though the words lacked their usual strength. "It's just, there's always something, isn't there?" She nodded, understanding more than he knew. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been through a lot too." He looked at her, his eyes softening, and for a moment, the girl could see the father in him, the man who cared more deeply than anyone had ever known. "You've been through more than anyone should ever have to," he said, his voice full of emotion. "But you're stronger than you think. You've shown me that every day." The girl smiled softly, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. She didn't need to hear the praise, but it felt good, felt like something she had never allowed herself to believe. She was worthy of love, of safety, of a future. The billionaire's hand rested on her shoulder, his touch grounding. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for how far you've come." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled, his eyes gleaming with pride. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." As the days passed, life seemed to return to a peaceful normalcy, but the girl couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. Something unresolved, something that lingered in the corners of her mind. She knew that, deep down, there was still a piece of her past she hadn't fully confronted. It wasn't just about the man from the billionaire's past. It was about her. Her own fears, her own doubts, her own sense of self-worth. She had spent so long living in survival mode, always looking over her shoulder, never allowing herself to truly be seen. But now, she was learning to be seen, to stand tall, to embrace the future that was waiting for her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the girl walked into the study, where the billionaire was sitting, reviewing some paperwork. She had made a decision, one that had been brewing for days, and she knew it was time to face it. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady. The billionaire looked up from his papers, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about my future," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "I want to go further with my education. I want to make something of myself." The billionaire set his papers down and looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said gently. "You've come so far already, and I know you'll do great things." The girl smiled, but there was something deeper in her that she was still struggling with. "It's not just about school," she said quietly. "It's about who I am, about who I want to be." The billionaire's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly, listening closely. "You are already who you're meant to be," he said. "You've always had that strength in you, even when you couldn't see it." She nodded slowly, a sense of peace beginning to settle over her. "I know," she whispered, "but I think I'm ready to see it now." The billionaire smiled, his gaze filled with pride. "Then I'll help you every step of the way." As the days turned into weeks, the girl continued to grow. She found herself looking forward to the future instead of fearing it. She began to explore the world outside the mansion more, meeting new people, engaging in things she never thought she could. Her education progressed, and with each passing day, she became more confident in who she was and who she was becoming. She had learned to trust again, to open up to the possibility of happiness, and to embrace the love and support that had been offered to her. But even as she stepped into this new chapter, she knew there would always be challenges ahead. The road would never be completely clear, but now, with the billionaire by her side, she felt ready for anything. Together, they would face the future, one step at a time. The days following the billionaire's promise to help the girl build her future were filled with quiet moments of growth. For the first time, she felt as if she were truly stepping into her life, not just surviving it. She had always been someone who kept to herself, who hid away from the world, afraid of being hurt again. But now, with the billionaire's steady support, she began to see herself differently. She started taking small steps toward the future she had never allowed herself to dream of. As she worked hard with her studies and spent time learning about the world outside the mansion, she began to open up, allowing herself to experience life in ways she never thought possible. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison, now felt like home. She had built her own sense of belonging within its walls, a place where she was no longer defined by her past, but by the person she was becoming. But even with all the progress, there were still moments when she felt unsure, when doubts crept in and threatened to pull her back into the shadows. The weight of her past was never far away, always just below the surface, reminding her of the things she had lost, the things she had yet to overcome. One evening, as they sat in the garden together, the girl could sense that something had shifted in the billionaire as well. He had been quieter than usual, and his eyes seemed distant, as if something was weighing on him. She had learned to read him, to understand the unspoken words behind his expressions. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice gentle. He looked at her, his gaze softening, but there was something else in his eyes, something she had never seen before. "I think it's time," he said slowly. "Time for what?" she asked, her heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The billionaire took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something important. "It's time for me to face my past," he said quietly. "I've kept it buried for too long, but it's not going away, and I need you to know the truth." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that there was more to his story, more to the man who had taken her in and given her everything. But hearing him speak about it now, with such vulnerability, made her realize just how much of his own pain he had been carrying all this time. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep sadness. "I've never told you everything about what happened before, about the choices I made, the things I did or didn't do." The girl remained silent, watching him closely, knowing that this moment would change everything between them. She had always wondered about the billionaire's past, about the secrets he kept hidden. But now, she understood that it wasn't just about him protecting her. It was about him protecting himself, too. "I'm not afraid of your past," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He smiled at her, the weight of his emotions lifting for a moment. "I don't want to drag you into this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need to face it. I need to stop running." The girl nodded, understanding more than he knew. She had spent so much of her life running from her own past, hiding from the things that scared her. But now, standing beside the billionaire, she realized that facing the past was the only way forward. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice full of determination. "We've already come this far." Over the next few days, the billionaire began to open up about his past. He told her about the mistakes he had made, the people he had hurt, and the pain he had carried with him for years. It wasn't an easy conversation, but the girl listened, not with judgment, but with understanding. She knew what it was like to live with regret, to carry the weight of the past on your shoulders. And as he spoke, she felt a deep sense of empathy for him, realizing that they were both haunted by the same ghosts. When he was finished, there was a long silence between them. The girl looked at him, her eyes soft with compassion. "You don't have to be ashamed," she said quietly. "You're not the person you were before. You've changed." The billionaire's eyes filled with gratitude, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope in them. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a chance to start over, to be a better person." The girl reached out and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're in this together," she said. "You don't have to face it alone." In the weeks that followed, the billionaire began to take action. He reached out to the people from his past, people he had hurt, people he needed to make amends with. It was difficult, painful even, but he did it, one step at a time. And with each step, the weight of his past began to lift. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were moments when he stumbled, when he faltered. But the girl was there, by his side, supporting him every step of the way. Together, they faced the challenges of the past, and in doing so, they began to create a new future. It was a future filled with hope, with healing, and with the understanding that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. And in that moment, the girl knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but it would be worth it. They had both faced their darkest fears and come out stronger on the other side. Together, they were ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection and healing, but the girl knew that the calm was only temporary. The billionaire had made peace with his past, and together, they had begun to rebuild. But as time passed, the girl couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The past, though addressed, still lingered in the corners of her mind. pulling at her whenever she allowed herself to think about it. But now, with each passing day, she felt a little stronger, a little more certain that she could face whatever came next. The future no longer seemed as distant or impossible as it once had. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the billionaire turned to her, his expression thoughtful. He had been distant in the last few days, and the girl noticed the change. He had always been a steady presence, but now, he seemed to be carrying something again, something she couldn't quite place. "You've been quiet," she said softly. He met her gaze and smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "About what?" she asked, feeling a growing sense of unease. He paused, gathering his thoughts before he spoke again. "About everything," he said. "About the choices I made. About the life we've built. I keep wondering if I'm doing enough. If I've done enough for you." The girl blinked, surprised by the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You've done more than enough," she said softly, her heart aching as she watched the man who had given her everything question his worth. "I don't think you understand," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I've spent so much of my life running away from the past, from the mistakes I made, that I never stopped to think about what really mattered. And now, with you, with everything we've been through, I'm not sure I'm the person I thought I was." The girl reached out, taking his hand in hers. The warmth of his touch was a comfort, but it couldn't mask the pain in his eyes. "You are the person you need to be," she said gently. "You've given me everything I could ever ask for. You've helped me rebuild my life, and you've done it with love and patience. I don't need anything more." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for some kind of answer. "But I want to be better for you," he whispered. "I want to be the father you deserve." The girl felt a lump rise in her throat. The vulnerability in his voice was something she hadn't heard before, and it made her realize just how much he had been carrying all this time. She had always thought of him as someone strong, someone who had everything under control, but now she saw the cracks in that facade, the human being beneath. She could see that he was not perfect, no one was, but it didn't matter. He had shown her what it meant to love, to care for someone, and she could see that his heart was pure. "You're already everything I need," she said, her voice firm, yet tender. "I never needed perfection. I needed someone who cared, and that's what you've given me." He squeezed her hand, his eyes softening with the weight of her words. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all the things I couldn't fix." The girl shook her head, a small smile on her lips. "You don't have to apologize," she said. "You've already done more than enough. We've already made it through everything together. That's what matters." There was a long silence between them, a comfortable one, as they sat in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The girl thought about everything that had happened to her, about the pain and the fear that had once ruled her life. But now, as she sat there with him, she realized that she was no longer the same person. She was stronger, more confident, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could truly belong. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. "But I know one thing. I'm not afraid of it anymore." The billionaire looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "You're ready," he said, his voice full of emotion. "You're ready for everything that comes your way." The girl smiled, her heart light. "And so are you," she said. Together, as they sat there, watching the night fall, it felt like the world had finally opened up for both of them. There was still so much ahead, so many challenges and uncertainties, but they had already faced the hardest parts of their journey. Together, they had built something beautiful, something that no one could take away. The future was theirs, and for the first time, the girl knew she was ready to embrace it. The days that followed felt like the beginning of something new. The girl and the billionaire had weathered so much together, and now, as she stood on the cusp of the future, it was hard to deny that they had built something strong. The bond they shared had grown deeper, not just as father and daughter, but as two people who had helped each other heal. The girl had learned so much in the past few months, how to trust, how to embrace love, how to stand up for herself, but the real change had happened inside. She wasn't the same person she had been when she arrived in that mansion. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. As the seasons changed, so did she. She spent more time out in the world, gaining experiences and making choices for herself. The mansion, once a place of uncertainty, now felt like a home. And yet, there were days when doubt would creep in, especially as she faced the reality of what the future could hold. The world was vast, filled with possibilities, but it was also full of challenges. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its difficulties, and there would always be moments when she would have to confront the shadows of her past. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was facing it alone. She had the billionaire by her side, and together, they could face whatever came their way. One afternoon, as they sat together in the study, the billionaire turned to her with a look that she recognized, the same kind of look he'd had when he was about to say something important. "There's something I want to discuss," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper. The girl looked up from her book, sensing that this was a moment of change. "What is it?" she asked. The billionaire took a breath, collecting his thoughts before speaking. "I've been thinking about your future," he said. "And I know you've come so far, but I want to make sure you have everything you need to build the life you deserve." The girl's heart fluttered in her chest, but she kept her composure. "What do you mean?" she asked. He leaned forward, his gaze locked on hers. "I think it's time for you to step outside of this place, to explore the world beyond these walls. You've made great strides, and I believe it's time for you to spread your wings." The girl was taken aback by his words. The idea of leaving the safety of the mansion, of venturing into the world beyond, filled her with both excitement and fear. She had spent so much of her life running away from the world, from people, from opportunities. The thought of stepping into the unknown was overwhelming. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The billionaire smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "You've always been ready," he said. "You've just needed the right person to help you realize it. And I think you've finally found that person." The girl's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just about what the billionaire had given her. It was about what she had given herself. She had faced her fears, faced the darkness, and come out on the other side stronger. "But what if I fail?" she asked, the doubt in her voice betraying the vulnerability she was feeling. "Failure is part of the journey," the billionaire said, his voice calm and reassuring. "It doesn't define you. What defines you is your ability to rise again, to learn from your mistakes, and keep moving forward." She nodded slowly, processing his words. She had always been afraid of failure, of not being enough, but now, she understood something that had eluded her for so long. Failure wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, to learn from. "I think I'm ready," she said finally, her voice stronger than before. The billionaire's smile widened, his pride shining through. "I knew you were," he said. "You've come so far, and now it's time for you to take the next step." The girl felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time, she was ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. She wasn't afraid of what was to come. She had everything she needed within her, and with the billionaire by her side, she knew she could face anything. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. The girl began to make plans, to research the next steps in her education and career. The billionaire supported her every step of the way, offering guidance and advice, but never pushing her. She had to make these decisions for herself, and for the first time, she was confident in her ability to do so. As the day of her departure approached, there was a bittersweet feeling that lingered. The mansion had been her safe haven, her refuge from the chaos of the world, but now it was time to step beyond it. She had grown here, but now it was time to see the world, to find her place in it. The billionaire stood with her at the front door, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "You've come so far, and I know you'll do great things." The girl smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "You've earned it all," he replied, his voice full of emotion. "Now go and make your mark." And with that, the girl stepped into the world outside, ready to begin the next chapter of her life. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew she was no longer alone. With the billionaire's love and support, she was ready for anything. The future was hers, and for the first time, she was ready to take it on. The day finally came, the day the girl had spent weeks preparing for, the day she would step fully into the future. She had worked so hard to get here, faced so many fears, and conquered obstacles she never thought she could overcome. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready. The mansion had been her refuge, her safe space, the place where she had begun to rebuild her life. It had offered her protection, warmth, and a sense of family she had never thought possible. But now, as she stood on the threshold of the life she was about to begin, she knew that it was time to leave this chapter behind. She walked through the halls one last time, pausing at the place where she had first met the billionaire. She could still remember the fear in her heart, the uncertainty of stepping into a world so foreign to her. But now, everything felt different. The fear was gone. The uncertainty had transformed into a quiet confidence. The billionaire had given her everything she needed: safety, love, understanding. And in return, she had given him trust, hope, and her belief in the possibility of a better future. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they had come out stronger on the other side. But it was time for her to fly on her own. She stood in front of the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle, and took a deep breath. Behind her, the billionaire appeared, his footsteps soft but steady. She turned to face him, her heart heavy but full. "I'm ready," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The billionaire looked at her, a small smile on his lips, but his eyes were filled with something deeper: pride, love, and something she had never expected: hope. "I know you are," he said, "and I'm so proud of you." She smiled, her heart swelling. "Thank you for everything." He stepped forward, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "You've done more than I could have ever asked for. You've become everything I knew you could be, and you will continue to be that person, no matter where you go." She nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. It wasn't just about the past or the struggles she had faced. It was about the future, her future, and she was ready to embrace it. "I won't forget everything you've done for me," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance, a real chance at a life I never thought possible." The billionaire smiled, his expression warm and genuine. "You earned that chance," he said simply. "Now go and take it." With that, she opened the door, stepping out into the world beyond the mansion. The air was cool, and the street stretched out before her, full of possibilities. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. She was no longer just the girl who had been rescued. She was someone new, someone who had found the strength to take control of her own life, someone who knew that the future was hers to shape. The billionaire watched her from the doorway, his eyes following her as she took her first steps into the world. He knew that this moment wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something even greater. She was ready, and so was he. As the girl walked down the street, her heart racing with excitement and anticipation, she realized that she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't running from fear, from pain, or from the past. She was walking toward her future, one step at a time. She didn't know exactly where the road would take her, but for the first time in her life, she was confident that she was headed in the right direction. And somewhere behind her, the billionaire stood, watching over her, knowing that she was strong enough to face whatever challenges came next. They had both learned to trust, to love, and to believe in each other. And no matter where life took them, they would always have that bond. A bond forged through struggle, through pain, and through love. The future was uncertain, but that was okay. Together, they had faced the storm. And together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that they were no longer alone.